Hello everybody, welcome to my YouTube channel Best IT Solutions, and today in this video I am going to discuss about the most asking Spring Framework questions in interview. So let's start. So our first question is, what is a Spring Framework? So Spring Framework is a lightweight, loosely coupled and integrated framework. So it is a lightweight, loosely coupled and integrated framework created to resolve the complexity of enterprise level application development. So to resolve the complexity of enterprise application development, Spring Framework has emerged. So it is a layered architecture. So because of its layered architecture, we can be selective about which of its components to use, while also providing a cohesive framework for J2EE application development also. So because of its layer architecture, we can selective about which of its component to use when, and also providing a cohesive framework for J2EE application development also. Next one is, what is the advantage of Spring Framework? So first one is, it has many more advantages. So it has a layered architecture and it enables POSO programming, and dependency injection and inversion of control is also another advantage. And also it has open source and no vendor lock-in. So these are the advantages of Spring Framework. It is a layered architecture and it enables POSO programming. POSO means plain old Java objects, and it dependency injection, inversion of control also support here, and also it is open source and vendor lock-in. So another question is, what are the features of Spring? So what main features of Spring says, like it is lightweight and inversion of control support, and it is container based and aspect oriented programming also support, and MVC framework, this is also features, and transaction management. So these are the features. JDBC exception handling. So these are the features of Spring Framework. So what are the moves in Spring Framework? Why we moving to Spring Framework? Spring Framework is a frameworks of framework. It is not only framework. Spring Framework is a framework of framework, like data access or integration, like JDBC, ORM, OXM, JSM transactions, and also it supports for web layer and web socket, servlet, web portlet. These are also supported in Spring Framework, and it supports for AOP, aspect oriented programming, instruction, instrumentation, messaging, and core container, beans, core, context, spell, SPL, and testing layer. So these are the moves of Spring Framework. So what is configuration file? So configuration is a file through which we supplying the metadata to our program. So it is a XML file which contains the classes information, which describes how classes are configured and introduced to each other. So it describes how classes are configured and described to each other. So this is the configuration file. Through this configuration, we will provide the configuration or metadata to the project. So another question is, what is the role of IOC container? So the role of IOC container is like, it creates the object and it wires them together. First it will create the object and it will wire them together, and also configure them, manage their complete life cycle from creation to till destructions. So in IOC container, it manages the object's complete life cycle from creation to till destructions, and also uses dependency injection to manage the components that make up an applications. So this is the roles of IOC container. Another important question is, what is dependency injection in Spring Framework? So dependency injection means we need not to create the object ourselves. Object is created by the Spring Framework, that is by the IOC container, and it will automatically inject to our program. So there are two ways to inject the object. One is constructor injection and the setter injection. So the dependency injection means we are inject the object to our program. object, we did not to bother about the creation of the object. Object is created by the Spring framework and it will be inject to our program. So how we will inject the object? This is different things, because when we mention the in a class like @ component or @ controller, the service repository, so that classes beans are automatically created in the IOC container, and when we auto add that classes, automatically that beans object has injected to our applications. The difference between constructor injections and setter injection. So the difference between constructor injection and setter injection is, in constructor injection there is no partial injections, but in setter injection there can be partial injection. Partial we can inject it, but in constructor injection, partial injection cannot be supported. It does not override the setter property. So in constructor injection it does not override the setter property, but in setter injection it overrides the constructor property. It will create new instance if any modification is done. So if any modification is done in constructor injection, it will create the new instance. But in setter injection, it will not create the new instance if modification is done. It is better for too many properties. When there are too many properties, it is better for constructor. It is good to go with constructor injection. But in setter injection, it is better for few properties. So how many types of IOC containers are found in Spring? So there are two types of containers are found in Spring. One is Beanfactory, another is application context. So Beanfactory is used for a small level application and application context is used for large level applications. Difference between Beanfactory and application context. Yes. So what are the differences between the Beanfactory and application context? Like Beanfactory uses lazy initializations and application context uses eager or aggressive initializations. And in Beanfactory explicitly provided our source object using the syntax. So in Beanfactory cases, we are explicitly provided the source object using the syntax, but creates and manages resources object on its own. So in application context, creates and manages the resources object on its own. Doesn't support internationalizations. Supports internationalizations. So in Beanfactory it doesn't support for internationalizations, and in application context it supports for internationalizations. And in Beanfactory annotation based dependency injection is not supported, and in application context annotation based dependency injection is supported, because now most of these we are go for annotation but injections only. Benefits of IOC container. So benefits of IOC containers are like it minimizes the amount of code in application and makes application easy to test. Loose coupling is promoted with minimal effort and support for dependency injection also. IOC containers support eager instantiation and lazy loading of services. So IOC container supports for eager initializations and lazy loading of services. So it is a advantage of the IOC container. Explain Spring Beans. So Spring Beans means the objects that form the backbone of the user. So Spring Beans are the backbone of the application. So it is an object that is instantiated, assembled and managed by IOC container. So this is the beans means these are the objects which are instantiated, assembled and managed by the IOC container, Spring IOC container. They are created with the configuration metadata from XML file. So these beans are created whichever metadata provided in XML file, from that XML file configurations, it will create the beans in IOC container. So we are providing how we are providing metadata. So we are providing metadata to IOC containers through XML files, and from that XML file configurations beans are created. How metadata is provided to the Spring container? So in various ways we can provide a metadata to the IOC container, like through a XML file and through annotations and through Java. So there are three types of configurations we can found in Spring, like XML based configurations, and one is annotation based configuration and another is Java based configuration. So in three ways we can supply metadata to the IOC container. how many bean scopes are supported by Spring? So there are 5 bean scopes are supported by the Springs, like singleton. It is single instances for Spring IOC container, and another is prototype, that is single bean definition to have any number of object instances, object instance. And another is request scope, HTTP request, that is only valid in the context of a web or Spring application context. And another is session scope, HTTP session, another is global session, global HTTP session. So there are the scopes of beans like singleton, prototype, request, session, and global session. What is a inner bean? So when a bean is only as a property of another bean, at that time it is called as inner bean. So when a bean is only used as a property of another bean, it becomes an inner bean. Inner beans are anonymous and are scoped as prototype. So the scope of inner beans are always prototype and it is anonymous in nature. What is bean wiring? So wiring means beans are combined together within the Spring container. So in Spring, within the Spring IOC container, when beans are combined together, this is called wiring. While wiring beans, Spring container needs to know what beans are required and how the container should use dependency injection to tie them together. What do you mean by auto-wiring, and name the different modes of it? So the Spring container is able to auto-wire relationship between collaborating beans that automatically Spring resolves collaborators for our bean when inspecting the contents of the Beanfactory. So different modes of auto-wiring are like by number, we can auto-add by number, also by name, by type, and through constructor, auto detect. So these are the modes of auto-wiring. So auto-wiring means we are auto-wiring the object. What are the limitations with auto-wiring? So limitations of auto-wiring, like it is that this is called also the disadvantage of auto-wiring, like overriding possibility. So sometimes there is a possibility of chances of overriding of objects, and also the another limitations like primitive data types, and also it is confusing in nature. So auto-wiring also sometimes it will be confusing that which beans we are injected here. What is component annotation? So component annotation is a stereotype of annotations, and different parts of this are like controller and service or repository. So when these annotations are mentioned in a particular class, so in IOC container, when found that annotations followed by class, then that class objects automatically created in the IOC container. So these are the stereotype of annotations. What do you understand by required annotation? So the required annotation is applied to bean property setter methods. So this indicates that at the configuration time, affected bean property should be populated in XML configuration file. Otherwise, the controller will throw a bean initialization exceptions. So required, and when we are write the required annotations, but in a particular setter method for a attributes, so during the XML file configurations, we need to initialize that beans, or we need to supply value to that proper attributes. Otherwise, it will show in bean initialization exceptions, because this value must be required here. So this is the means of required annotation. So here this is an example. You can follow it like public class employee, private string name. So here name is an attributes here. So when we are creating the setter methods of the name, public void set name, so at that time we are writing an required. That means during the program starts, the name should be initialized. What do you mean by auto-wire annotation? So the auto-wire annotation provides more accurate context over where and how autowiring should be done. The arbitrary autowiring annotation is used to autowire bean on the setter methods, constructor, array property or methods with the arbitrary names and multiple arguments. So to inject the object, it is generally used arbitrary autowiring annotations. What do you mean by qualifier annotations? So in situation like when you create more than one bean of the same type and want to wire only one of them with a property, you can use qualifier annotations along with autowire to remove the ambiguity by specifying which exact bean should be wired. For example, autowire and qualifier, we can pass the arguments like EMPI. That means now it requires the beans of the EMPI class. So, and there are, if more than one beans are created of the same type, then which bean, sometimes it will be create confusion, or it will be create ambiguity that which beans here we need to inject. At that time, if we mention the qualifier with the autowire and we mention the class type, then that beans automatically injected here. What do you mean by request mapping annotations? So request mapping annotation is used for mapping a particular HTTP request method to a specific class or method in controller that will be handling the respective request. So request mapping annotation is used for mapping a particular HTTP request, whatever HTTP request comes, and which it will go to which class or which method it will handle. So that is mentioned through request mapping annotation. So request mapping annotation is used for mapping a particular HTTP request method to a specific class or methods in controller that will be handling the respective requests. And request mapping annotations can be used both in class level and also in method level. Generally, it is used in the controller class to route the request, HTTP request. Describe Spring DAO supports. So provides a set of abstract DAO classes which can be extended, aimed at making it easy to work data access technology like Hibernate or JDBC or JDO in a consistent way. So these are the DAO supports. The Spring supports for Hibernate, JDBC or JDO in a consistent way. We can easily switch between the persistent technology code without worrying about caching exceptions that are specific to each technology. So these are the DAO supports. So in diagrammatically, if we will see that the Spring DAO supports are like Spring, that is Hibernate, and the JDBC and the JDO. These are the DAO supports, data access object supports. What are classes present in Spring JDBC API? So there are a number of classes present in the Spring JDBC API like JDBC template, simple JDBC template, named parameter JDBC template, and simple JDBC instant and simple JDBC call. So these are the classes found in JDBC template. Which way Hibernate can be accessed by using Spring? So there are two ways of accessing Hibernate by using Spring, like IOC with a Hibernate template and callback, and extending Hibernate DAO support and applying an AOB interceptor mode. So in this way we can access Hibernate in our Spring project, like through first one is through the IOC with the help of Hibernate template and callback, and extending Hibernate DAO support class. Name the types of transaction management that Spring supports. So what are the types of transaction management that Spring supports? Like programmatic transaction management and declarative transaction management. The two types of transaction management supported by the Spring. So what is programmatic transaction management? Transaction is managed with the help of program. So in programmatic transaction management, transactions are managed through the help of the program. But in declarative transaction management is separated from the business code. And in programmatic transaction management, these provide extreme flexibility, but it is difficult to maintain. So in through program it is extreme flexibility, but it will difficult to maintain the programmatic transaction management, because to maintain the transaction through programmatic it will very difficult to maintain. But in declarative transaction management, only annotations or example which configurations are used to manage the transactions. What are ORM supported by Spring? So ORM means object relational mapping. So there's a number of ORM tools are there which are supported by Spring, like Oracle, that is top link from Oracle, and JPA, another is JDO, and Hibernate, IVTs, OGB. So these are the ORM tools which are supported with this Spring, and most nowadays mostly use the JPA, that is Java Persistence API. Describe AOP. AOP means aspect oriented programming. So the techniques which allows the programmers to modularize cross-cutting concerns or behavior that cuts across the typical divisions of responsibility. So aspect oriented programming means these are techniques which allow the programmers to modularize cross-cutting concerns or behavior that cuts across the typical divisions of responsibility. The core construct of aspect-oriented programming is the aspect, which encapsulates behavior affecting multiple classes into reusable modules. So the core concept of AOP is the aspect, so which encapsulates behavior affecting multiple classes into reusable modules. So whichever behaviors affecting the multiple classes, that will be reusable in a particular modules, and that modules can be reused. What do you mean by aspect? So aspect is a modularization of a concern that cuts across the multiple objects. So aspect is a modularization of a concern. So it is a modularization of a particular concept or concern that cuts across multiple objects, which are affect the multiple objects. So here is a diagram like aspect, and there is source method, is target method, and there is point cut, and there is joint point. Through the joint point only the aspects are linked to the source method and target method. Explain joint point. What is joint point? So a point during the execution of a program, such as the execution of a method or the handling of an exception. In Spring AOP, a joint point always represents a method execution. So a joint point is the starting of a method execution point, where the in which point a method execution starts. This is the joint point. So point during the execution of a program. So it is the point during the execution of a program, such as an execution of a method or the handling of an exception. In Spring AOP, a joint point always represents a method execution. So these are the joint points. Joint points where the method execution starts. So what is an advice? So action taken by an aspect at a particular joint point. So advice is an action taken by an aspect at a particular joint point. Different types of advice include around, before, after returning, after throwing, and means IOP framework mode, AOP framework models and advice as an interceptor, maintaining a chain of interceptors around the joint point. So it is a advice means it is an action taken by an aspect at a particular joint point. Different type of advice includes around, before, after running, after throwing, and means AOP framework models and advice as an interceptor, maintaining a chain of interceptor around the joint point. So difference between concern and cross-cutting concern in Spring AOP means concern and cross-cutting concern. What is the difference between them? Like concern, it is a behavior we want to have in a module of an application. So concern, it is a behavior we want to have in a particular module of an application, and cross-cutting concern, it is a concern which is applicable throughout the application and it will affect the entire application. So in cross-cutting concern, it is a concern which affect the entire application. What in concern, it is a behavior. We want to have a module of an application. A part of an application, that is in module of application concern is, but in cross-cutting concern, it is a which for whole applications. What are the different AOP implementations? So there are number of different number of AOP implementations are found, like Spring AOP or Apache Aspect J, another is JBoss AOP. So like there are various AOP implementations are there. Difference between Spring AOP and Aspect J AOP. So in Spring AOP, runtime weaving through proxy happens, and in Aspect J AOP, compile time weaving through Aspect J Java tools. So in Spring AOP, it is runtime weaving through proxy, it is compile time weaving through Aspect J Java tools. Supports only method level point cut. In Spring AOP, it supports only method level point cut, but in Aspect J AOP supports field level point cuts also. And in Spring AOP, it is TD based, and in Aspect J AOP is schema based and annotation configuration. So it is based on schema and annotation based configuration supports. What do you mean by proxy? So the objects created after applying advice to a target object. So proxy means the object created after applying advice to a target object. When we are applying the advice into a particular target object, then a proxy will create. In respect to client objects, the target objects and proxy object are the same. So in respect to the client objects, the target object and the proxy objects are same. So when we are applying advice to a particular target object, then one proxy will be created. It is also clearly shown in diagram, that is advice for target object will be proxy. Another question is, what is weaving in Spring? So when an aspect is linked with other application types on objects to create an advice object, this process is called weaving. So when an aspect is linked with other application types on objects to create an advice object. So when aspect is linked to other application to create an advice object, this process is called weaving. This can be performed at compile time, runtime or load time. In Spring Framework, weaving is performed at runtime. So in Spring Framework, weaving is performed in runtime. So there is caller and target proxy. What is web application context? So web application context is a extension of application context. So web application context is the extension of application context. It has some extra features which is necessary for web application. So the web application context is some extra features for web which is required for the web applications. It also capable of resolving themes, and it knows which servlet it is associated to. Okay guys, so this is all about the Spring interview questions, and this much in this video tutorial. Okay guys, thank you.